Well, thank you, Chair Fiorini, and good morning, everyone. I think really what I'm going to be doing here is just building on earlier comments by Secretary Laird. Jared, I really appreciated the comments you made about the role of science, and Campbell, of course, also emphasized science. So what we're really seeing here in the Water Action Plan and all of these numerous programs, the pervasive thing behind the scenes, it's the science and the engineering that is going to help us achieve this. I'd like to just make a few comments about the Delta Science program for those of you who maybe have just moved to the area recently. We are a state-federal partnership. We've been in place since 2000. It used to be the CalFed Science Program. Following the Delta Reform Act of 2009, we then became part of the Delta Stewardship Council. And on the federal side, the USGS has been our primary partner since the very beginning. Our mission is defined in legislation, and that is to provide the highest caliber of scientific information for water and environmental decision-making in the Bay Delta system. And we heard several references made to best available science. Of course, that's written into both federal and state law. I'd also like to make the point that we do not do science in the science program. Our job is to facilitate scientific activities, to get the right people at the table from across the entire spectrum of the scientific discipline. So we do peer review, we do fund research ourselves through both open competitions and directed actions, and we also deal with communications. So the online journal, the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science, is operated through our program as well. And if you were to capture our real role, many years ago, I think the term was coined honest brokers. So our job is to be the independent assessment in adjudicating science. Today, we'd just like to achieve two things. One is to give you a cross-agency understanding of what the Delta Science Plan is about. And then secondly, some of the opportunities that this plan provides. So the Delta Science Plan, as we've heard, it's the vision of one Delta, one science. And what do we mean by that? This is the ability to build an open Delta science community that works together to build a common state of knowledge, a common body of knowledge, with the capacity to adapt and inform current and future water and environmental decisions in the Delta. I'll also talk in more detail about some of the opportunities in a moment. So why was the need for this science plan? I think most of you who've spoken have really highlighted that. But it started with the joint statement by Governor Brown and Secretary Salazar at the time. And as part of that announcement, they made it clear that through the federal-state partnership and with science as our guide, the problems of California's water would be solved. As Dan Ray mentioned earlier, the Delta Reform Act led to the Delta Plan, and the Delta Plan explicitly required a science plan. And of course, there's been several recent National Academies reports that also highlighted this need. But I'd also like to highlight Director Bonham's comment earlier as well. This is urgent and high stakes, and we'll move very rapidly to item 5A to discuss this in more detail. But of course, more than 2/3 of Californians rely on Delta water. And I'd like to reiterate Jared's comment a few minutes ago. The science community is committed that science should be not used as an excuse for inaction. If we sit around doing nothing, it doesn't matter what's done, then everybody knows the outcome. It's not just the drought, it's going to be the disasters, the loss of a reliable water supply. The other important element where we started the science plan, which was at the Delta Science Conference, Director Cowan described the culture of combat and litigation and how both through the courts and through the directors, there was this desire for collaboration. And his point was, how do you move from this culture of litigation and combat into one of collaboration? The final point is that we spent a lot of time looking at how this is done in other systems. And the Bay Delta system is different. Not only are you dealing with over 230 agencies at different levels, but unlike many of the other systems, Chesapeake Bay, it has one driver primarily. Of course, everything's important, but it's driven by water quality. Louisiana, the number one driver is land building. In the Columbia Basin, it's essentially salmon. Of course, everything's important, but there's a single driver. In the Delta, we simply don't have that luxury. There's multiple stresses, multiple endangered species, as we heard from Secretary Laird, and the co-equal goals. So it's a much more complex social, environmental system to deal with. Very quickly, the science plan was completed in December of 2013. We'd really like to thank you. Many of the people around the table had direct personal involvement in the development of the plan, and your staff were just superb as we put this together. We fully understand that it is not perfect, and the Council made it clear when they received the plan back in November that they wanted us to get started, but to do a very detailed assessment. What's working, what isn't working, how do we adapt it after year one to make it work for each of your agencies. The science plan, you have a copy there, is divided really into three sections. The first is how do we organize science to inform policy and management, and that's communication goes both ways. The direction needs to come down from you, the innovation needs to bubble up from the bottom. Secondly, how do you structure science to support adaptive management in such a complex system? At the start of this program, we counted 29 separate adaptive management plans influencing things in the Delta. If that isn't coordinated, how on earth can you understand cause and effect? And finally, we took a hard look at the barriers. What do scientists need to conduct collaborative science? And many of the things that Campbell and his staff have put together around the restoration hub, you'll see included there. It's the models, it's the monitoring. We know the Delta is rapidly dynamic. We know it's changing. We know we cannot rely on history, the past, to understand the future. So we have to bring totally new ways to understand how that works. Are we collecting the right data? We have some great models, absolutely world class. The problem is those models are not connected. So if you push the system, it's really hard to understand all of the consequences. And so whose science plan is it anyway? To achieve the vision of One Delta, One Science, as you'll see, it has to be everybody's plan. We received over 1,000 individual comments in the development of this plan. And if it's going to work, everyone has to embrace it. This does not mean that everybody agrees to science. That's not how science works. But what we need to do is to structure the legitimate differences in scientific opinion and to build processes to resolve that. So we can agree, what do we know? I think Jared made the point. We know an awful lot about this system. It's probably the most studied Delta system anywhere in the world, possibly Louisiana, the lower Mississippi. But we understand a lot about this system. But there are legitimate scientific disagreements, and how we address uncertainty. Again, in that very first town hall meeting, how we manage uncertainty was key. So this is a common roadmap of science. And what I'd like to do now is just run through a couple of examples. I was going to show a video clip, but as the person is sitting here in the audience, I'm going to jump over that. But I did want to just mention the collaborative adaptive management team. And as we were developing the science plan, this, of course, was going on at the same time. Many of the scientists operating in both arenas were part of both processes. And so I was going to show a brief clip here from Leo, but I'm going to jump over that in the interest of time. But the important point here is there was a lot of discussion about how do you make collaborative science work. And so many of the principles you see in the science plan came out of the process of CAMPT. And we have a real opportunity here to road test some of these concepts. Can we really make it work? Can we accelerate knowledge discovery rather than entrenching in traditional positions? The second example I wanted to give is that, again, too many decisions are made in the courtroom. So how do you manage scientific conflict? And what we heard time and time again is that science does not operate on the time frame that decisions need to be made. So what you'll see in the science plan itself, there's a range of processes ranging from we need an answer Friday week to some of these much deeper questions where there's members of the national academies on both sides of very controversial issues that we need to develop resolution. So here is just a few examples. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this now, but the top example there, the State Board came to us, said we need some really quick information on in-stream flow criteria. So I think this report was turned around start to finish in about three weeks. It's a summary of where in-stream flow criteria in an innovative way has worked in other states and coupled with what's happening in the Feather River. And then it's a synthesis of what lessons can be learned there with possible ideas for the State Board to consider. And the one at the bottom there is a much longer process. I won't go into that, but I really would like to acknowledge the scientists on all sides of the issues that came up with the DCAS vision. We've also heard a lot about some of the challenges which face us, and it was too big just to write up in the science plan itself. So this, as Campbell had mentioned earlier, we're in this era of big data. Sometimes it's called the new statistics. It's the new fourth branch of science. We've got Silicon Valley down the road. We've got a lot of 6 of the top 20 universities in the world right here. We can be on the cutting edge of that in terms of knowledge discovery, accessing data. Secondly, the National Academies highlighted modeling. There's world-class models here. Some of the salmon life cycle models, what's being done for delta smelt. But when you put these very complex models together, you need to bring the best discipline models from across the full discipline. Right now, we're not doing that as well as we could be. So we're going to have a second summit, again bringing in people from other branches of science, people who've done this successfully at the global level, as well as local experts. And the last thing here, just in terms of actions, the Delta Science Conference will be held in October this year. On behalf of the science community, we had a meeting of the organizing committee yesterday. They extend a cordial invitation to all of you to attend. We fully understand you don't have the time to commit to everything. You'll see there's a lot of innovations to discuss some of these really tricky science issues. If it interests you, it's an open invitation. You can just walk in and you'd be welcome for that particular session. So thanks to the organizing committee for that. The last example that I wanted to give is this Interim Science Action Agenda. This is going to be a 2-year plan to look at what's being done for science currently across the agencies. It's not our intent to interfere with individual agencies' legal mandates and science programs. But we want to have a single document, so when you're being asked, okay, how does your agency science fit into everything else? There will be one document that articulates how all of these things fit together. So it's a shared list of common priority science needs, questions, and actions. And it's also a collaborative roadmap for science. And we just had a couple of questions here. One is we're right at the start of this. We know people are totally stretched with the drought right now. But we welcome in the next few weeks your staff's involvement in developing this action plan and also knowing what are your grand challenges. We in the science community can put great science, but if it's not relevant, if it's not going to help you with your day-to-day challenges and the big challenges that you see coming up in the next few decades, which is what you're being asked to do, then this plan is not doing what it should do. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that to give the appreciation for the many, many people who contributed to this One Delta One Science concept. Hopefully we can transform our culture, as Director Cowan challenged us to in that first town hall meeting. And these are just some of the elements which you'll see in the Delta Plan. So thanks for your attention. And if I missed anything, Chair Fiorini, please jump in.
Dr. Goodwin, thank you very much. This is an opportunity for each of you